check out the matching stripes in these shorts. I'm going to show you how I did that. Hey guys, welcome to Mrs. G's Sewing Space. I'm so glad you're joining us today, and today, as you can see, we are talking about matching the plaid. Now, a lot of people who sew sometimes have problems matching up the lines in any of the when you're sewing with plaids or stripes or squares or anything like that. So what I am doing in preparation before cutting anything out is that I'm laying out my fabric and I am matching up the lines on the bottom part of the fabric to the top part of the fabric. So when I cut out my pieces, each piece will be as identical as I can make it to each other regarding where the lines lay and where the plaid lays. And I'm working the fabric out, so no wrinkles or anything like that. Just getting ready to lay down my pattern piece to cut it out. So at this point, now that I have all my fabric laid out, I have positioned the pattern piece where I wanted it. I had already decided that I was going to choose these two small thin lines that are as a part of the plaid, and I was going to line it up with those lines. And so I marked my pattern piece in a purple highlighter, and I also matched it up along the crotch line so that that crotch line goes all the way across the pattern. So I started at the crotch and I marked it in highlighted purple highlighter. Now I'm marking the other side, the side seam, in purple highlighter, also at where those two small thin plaid lines are. You can't necessarily see it on the camera, but that's where I marked it. So they line up on both sides. And once I have the marks at the crotch and on the side seam, then I could start pinning everything together and getting ready to cut it out. Now it's really important to take your time to lay out the fabric so that the lines match up, and it's also important to make sure that you know where you want to place your pattern. So when you're buying fabric that has a plaid or any type of direction like this, you might need to buy extra, because if you have an idea in your head of where you want those stripes to lay, if you don't have extra fabric, you may not be able to lay it out the way that you want to lay it out, because those lines may not line up where you want them to lay at. So if you buy a little bit extra, it gives you more wiggle room to figure out where you want those stripes to lay. So once everything is pinned and I'm happy with the placement of where my pattern is and where the lines are, I'm going to cut out my fabric.
I interrupt this video just to let you know there is a way to mark your patterns if you don't happen to have the crotch lines. So throughout this entire video, I was working off of these lines right here, these black lines that went from the crotch to the side hip. This is the crotch line for each individual size on this particular pattern. But if you don't have the crotch lines, this is what you do. You need a yardstick and your pencil and your pattern. Now I'm going to go ahead and use this one because it's already been used. But you notice when you line up the corners of your inseams right here together, that line tends to go straight across. So if you had a pair of pants or a shirt or anything like that, line up the seam that makes the most sense. In this case it would be the inseam. Line it up so that you're not going to be able to line it up straight, but as long as your crotch inseam right here, your points are together and the pattern is pretty much straight on as you can get it, then you'll be able to draw your line. And it doesn't matter where on the pattern that you draw your line, as long as you have a line there to indicate where it matches at. So instead of here at the crotch line, I could do it further up here at the waist, and I would just need to make sure it's straight. Right there. So that way I know with every time I lay this piece down and this piece down, it needs to line up with the same part of the plaid or the stripe on my fabric as it does on each piece. So the plaid that I was working with in this video, I chose a thin white line that was my reference point. So I made sure that every time I lined up my fabric, it was on the thin white line, which is why I have my purple highlight marks right here, because the top purple mark was my thin white line and the bottom purple mark was a thinner blue line. So it was two lines that I chose for the pattern for the shorts that I was working on in this video. So use this tip when you want to match up whatever stripes or plaids that you have that run horizontally. You use your grain line for the verticals, but for horizontally you can draw your own line.
Now once I had the front cut out, it was time to cut out the back, and I hadn't marked on the back piece where the lines were. So if you look down, you can see the crotch lines on the front piece are also on the back piece, and I used those to line up where I wanted the lines to lay. So I was able to mark on the hip and the crotch again in purple highlighter for me, so I could see it in purple highlighter where the lines were going to lay. So marking my pattern in this way allows me to match up the lines on each piece so that they all line up together. As long as I've laid my fabric out right, then marking on my pattern piece lets me know, okay, so I have two small thin lines that I chose for the front. I marked my pattern piece on the front, and now I'm marking my back pattern piece so that when everything lines up, those lines will still line up after I've cut it out. And this is where you might need extra at, because see how I'm shifting it around to find the thin lines? See that thin white line? The thin white line is what my original line was. So I have to line it up and make sure it matches on both sides in order to have the lines match when everything's put together. And now that the lines match at the crotch and at the side seam, I can pin everything together and then get ready to cut it out and get ready to sew it up. Right here are the pattern pieces with the fabric still pinned to each other, and I'm showing you where the lines are. So those long black lines is the crotch line on the pattern piece, and my purple highlights is what I used to mark the pattern piece where that thin white line I chose on my plaid fabric is where I wanted everything to line up. So I just chose one line and lined it all up according to that one line of white in the plaid. So now I'm taking everything apart and let's see how it looks. And there you go. So because I made marks on my pattern of where I wanted the lines to be, I chose that white line right there, and there's a blue line right beside it. I marked it on my pattern, and then I transferred the pattern marks to the other pattern, to the front and the back, and then I was able to use that to line up my pattern pieces when I wanted to cut them out. And because the marks lined up, everything else should match as best as possible as well. I think I was slightly off on one side seam. I think I was just a little bit off of one side seam, but it mostly matched. And because these are pajama pants for my son, he's not going to care. But there he goes, side seams matched, everything gets pinned up, and we're getting ready to sew everything together. Here they are. I have seamed the inside legs and the crotch and the side seams. I hadn't flipped anything out yet. We're going to do it right now. Let's go ahead and flip it all out. Let's see how well everything ended up matching up. Shimmy, shake it out, and there you go. And there it is. Everything is matched up. It might look a little funny around the waist and the hip, but you see those lines there? My plaid is lined up perfectly straight across from the top to the bottom in a perfect match. Now you can use this technique in any pattern that you have that needs to line up stripes or plaids or anything like that. Just mark your pattern and make sure the placement marks are the same on each corresponding piece.